Good evening, guys. This evening, I just wanted to share my understanding of Jesus, who Jesus was. Jesus, for me, is not only a figure who lived 2,000 years ago, not only a figure who we can look up to and aspire to be like in loving our neighbors, in following Jesus, but the image of Jesus also kind of conjures up perhaps astrological or spiritual interpretations. And for me, I realized that Jesus is actually at the center of everything. The images of Jesus and the spiritual text that is the Bible is actually at the center of everything and actually explains a lot in terms of other spiritual traditions. So we have this idea in the Bible where there are three wise men who are following a star to find the King of the Jews, the Messiah. And it reads in Matthew 2:1-2, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. So if we look at this passage here we have three Magi. Imagine that the word Magi is derived from the word magician. So we had three magicians who are coming from the east of Jerusalem. And this might conjure up the idea that this passage is actually speaking of the Far East and faiths thereof. So two prominent faiths in the Far East are Hinduism and Buddhism. Within the Hindu faith, we have this idea of chakras, where there are 7 chakras. And the number 7 is quite prominent throughout our daily lives. We have 7 days of the week. Also, if we think about the idea of music or solfeggio frequencies, there are 7 tones or 7 frequencies in our do, re, mi scale. We have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, 7 tones. We also may think that maybe in the rainbow we have 7 prominent colors which come out as well. So the number 7 is quite prominent within our daily lives and within spiritual texts. So I thought to myself, if the Bible is talking about 3 magicians who have come from the East and possibly the Far East, from Hinduism and Buddhism, could we apply Far Eastern spiritual knowledge or philosophy to images and scriptures of the Bible? And I believe we can, if we actually analyze certain images within Christianity or analyze certain texts, we can actually come to the same conclusion that certain faiths in the Far East are actually portraying. So here is a diagram from ancient Indian spiritual philosophy, and it's this idea of chakras, which are in the body. And it's interesting to note here the different chakras and how they're associated with different parts of the earth. So if we look here at the root chakra, it's associated with wood and earth. Think about the idea of the root chakra, that the roots of a tree are in the material earth. So the root chakra is associated with the earth. The sacral chakra is then associated with water, and the solar plexus is associated with fire. So if we take the image of Christ walking in water, and we say to ourselves, if a Hindu or a Buddhist would look at this image, what sort of interpretation would they take from this image? Would they take an inward spiritual interpretation of this image? And we have this idea that the Bible is not really to be taken literally. It's actually a spiritual text. And here we have 3 wise men coming from possibly the Far East, applying a spiritual background to the Bible. So I believe we can look at the certain images, particularly the image of Christ walking on water, and apply perhaps a Far Eastern spiritual interpretation, perhaps a Hindu interpretation. So again, if we go back to the image of our chakras, we see that water represents the sacral. So the image of Christ walking on water actually to a Hindu might actually mean that Christ was above the sacred, that Christ was above his sexual desires and creative desires, that he was celibate. So if Christ is not in the water in this image, from a Hindu spiritual perspective, this actually means that he's in the next energy center, which is the solar plexus, which I said was governed by the element of fire. And this is actually interesting because in Luke 3:16, it actually reads how there is one who is mightier than John the Baptist, who will come to baptize us with the Holy Spirit and fire. And it reads from Luke 3:16, John answered them all, I baptize you with water, but one who is more powerful than I will come, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. This is actually interesting because if we look at our image of Christ walking in water and we apply the Far Eastern spiritual philosophy to it, that the water actually represents the sacred, sexuality, and creativity, and that the fact that Christ is above the water actually means he's in the solar plexus, which is governed by the element of fire. This image is actually saying, from a Far Eastern spiritual perspective, it's actually saying the same thing that the Gospel of Luke is saying in Luke 3:16. And it also says this in Luke 12:49-52. I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled, but I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. So the Gospels are all about Jesus' life. So this Gospel here, the Gospel of Luke, is actually commenting on Jesus' life. This person that he's saying, Luke is saying will come with fire, is Christ. And it's interesting as well that in many Christian churches, we will actually see the dove coming with flames, represented as the Holy Spirit. But it's interesting as well that as I've read how Christ will come with fire, I've only ever read this from the Gospel of Luke. Perhaps it is in other Gospels. There are 4 Gospels which account Jesus' life. But interestingly, the story of Jesus walking on water is not included in the Gospel of Luke. It only appears in 3 Gospels. In the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and John. So my kind of interpretation of this is that Christ is actually a spirit which comes through us, which ignites his fire inside us, as we can see from our chakras, that when the solar plexus opens up, this fire ignites inside us and it baptizes. It's an image of Christ coming to baptize us, to change us in a sense. And so it's interesting here how the Gospel of Luke never saw Christ walking in water. So imagine this is an inward interpretation that whatever Luke was doing, he never saw Christ in water. This is not only a literal walking in water, a miracle, but it's actually a spiritual walking in water. It represents something that is happening within us, that Christ is living inside us, and that Christ within us has a kind of a spiritual meaning when he walks in water. But for some reason, Luke did not see this. So it's interesting now how Christ walking in water actually represents the solar plexus, which is the 3rd chakra. And we can see from our image here of Christ with his heart on fire, how if we go back to our images of chakras, that the solar plexus is actually represented by fire and by the heart. So this is interesting as well, is that this image of the chakras is actually conveying the same message that the image of Christ with his heart and fire is conveying. The image of Christ the image of Christ with his heart and fire is actually also reflecting upon the solar plexus. And this solar plexus is the third chakra, as we can see from our diagram. And this actually might be why the reason that God has the name God has 3 letters, because it's referring to the third chakra. If you imagine also as well, the third chakra is where the womb is. This is where life begins. This is where you perceive what you think are energies or just a material existence around you. It actually becomes alive. And this is why the Christ is actually referred to as the living God, because it's referring to the womb and how life is beginning here. It also might mean that if we think of the idea of the Son of Man, that the word Son has 3 letters and the word Man has 3 letters as well. This also may refer to the third chakra or the solar plexus. Interestingly as well, the Hindu word for the solar plexus is actually Mani Pura. And I imagine that somehow there's a relationship between Hindu language and the Far Eastern language and the Western language, that somehow these languages are kind of developing somehow side by side. And that perhaps the word man is derived from the same origin as the word mani in Hinduism and Mani Pura. That the word man actually refers to the solar plexus as well. Because if we think of the idea that the sacral is actually represented by creating a child, creating life, and it's not until we awaken the solar plexus that we actually become a man or a woman. I also reflected as well one time how the old Irish language was very similar in pronunciation to the Hindu language. Its writing style wasn't the same, but its pronunciation of certain words were very similar. And I believe that this is also true of the English language. Somehow these languages, the Eastern and Western languages, are actually developing side by side, and a lot of the words actually have similar meanings. So this is interesting how the image of Christ with his heart and fire actually reflects upon the same idea that the image of the chakras is referring to, that this image of Christ with his heart and fire actually refers to the solar plexus, which I said that the image of Christ walking the water actually means that he's in the solar plexus, he's on fire. And this is why it reads in Luke 3:16 and Luke 12:49 to 52, how Christ will come to baptize us with fire. So the spiritual texts, whether they're from the East or Far East, or from a Christian background or a Jewish background, are actually portraying the same kind of spiritual message. So when I realized this, that the whole imagery of Christ is referring to the third chakra, and that the name God has 3 letters because it's also referring to the third chakra as well, I kind of came to the conclusion that the third chakra is associated with what ancient spiritual texts call the third eye. This is an eye that is imagined to be at the top of our head on our foreheads. It is an eye that doesn't see duality. If we imagine we have 2 eyes that look into the physical world, and when our third eye opens, we actually start to see things one. We go further into our dream, and this third eye becomes a whole eye, where we no longer see things as dualistic. We start to see things as one or as whole. And this actually might be where the word holy comes from, or holiday. But it also may be where the word halo comes from, and that the halo actually refers to the whole eye or third eye. And then in turn, it has a relationship with the third chakra. Interestingly as well, the third chakra is a yellow color. And but in Christian artwork, the halo is also a color of yellow. If we analyze here from this image of Christ as well and his halo, we'll notice how there are 3 spokes coming out of the halo. As I said, the halo represents the whole eye, or the third eye. This is why there are 3 spokes coming out of the halo, because it represents the third eye, and in turn this then has a relationship with the third chakra, which is why Christ's heart is on fire, because it also refers to the third chakra. So another image I came across from another spiritual group, it wasn't from a Hindu background or a Far Eastern background or a Christian background. It was from another, perhaps esoteric group, just not related. And I just got this image from the internet, and I found it interesting how at the base of the head, at the forehead, was this yellow bright light, and it pointed down to the midsection where the solar plexus is, and it kind of confirmed this idea for me that the third eye is associated with the third chakra or the solar plexus, but that the solar plexus is associated with the solar system. If you imagine that our system within, whether it be energetic, whether it be spiritual, whether it be material, is a reflection of what's happening outside. If you imagine that the color sequence of the sun as it rises in the morning is red, orange, then yellow, this is actually the same color sequence as the first three chakras. So what's happening internally is actually a reflection of what's happening externally. And so the third eye is actually associated with the third chakra or the solar plexus, and this then in turn is associated with the solar system. So when our solar plexus opens up, when we give up what is below it, when we give up material possessions in the root chakra, and we give up desires, creative desires, sexual desires, our solar plexus begins to open up. We actually start to feel more sensitive to other people's thoughts, other people's feelings, other spirits, other energies. But we also feel more attuned to the sun and the cycles around us of the moon and our planet. So you'll notice maybe a lot of entrepreneurs actually convey this idea that they benefit from waking up at between 5 and 6 in the morning. This is actually when the sun is closest to the planet. And if your solar plexus is open up, you will actually gain from the energy of the sun, and it'll actually impact on your whole day, and particularly on your mind. So if we become aware of this idea that the solar plexus is associated with the third eye in the mind, we can also then become aware of how the hands or the arms and the legs actually come into where the solar plexus is. So if we realize this, we actually come to the conclusion that the hands and the feet are actually antennae for the solar plexus. And this is actually in turn feeding information, feeding spirits, energies back to the solar plexus, back to the third eye and to the mind. So if we want to gain control of our minds, it's not psychological things we need to consider. It's not psychological practices or emotional practices. It's not medication or drugs that can help us. It's actually prayer or meditation. It's actually bringing our hands and our feet together, closing them off to the outside world, or bringing them up to the sky, up to the Lord. This is actually what helps our mind, helps us psychologically. If we are unbalanced psychologically or emotionally, this is because our hands and our feet are constantly in the physical world, taking in other people's thoughts and emotions. And if we actually retreat to the nature or up mountains, we actually feel at more peace because there's less people there, there's less thoughts, less emotions around us. So actually, if we become aware of this, that the hands and feet actually feed information back into the third chakra, into the solar plexus. And if we want to gain control of our solar plexus, we want to gain control of our third eye, our mind, we need to bring our hands together in prayer, or we need to bring our feet together in a meditation, close them off to the outside world, and just interpret what is within. This is why many spiritual traditions across the world bring their hands and feet in prayer. They fill themselves with the Holy Spirit instead of the thoughts and feelings and energies outside. So there are many images of worship within Christian within the Christian tradition, where we see this idea how people are standing in front of the sun just before it comes up, and how their hands are outstretched, conveying this idea that the hands are actually antennae for the solar plexus, feeding the energy, particularly of the sun in the morning, back into the solar plexus, back into the third eye, and charging us up, giving us a better day, and charging particularly our minds. Another image is here as well of worship, of this idea of the hands and how they're taking in the energy of the sun in the morning. And so the idea of the third eye is actually known throughout ages by all ancient cultures. Many reflected upon how the third eye is actually referred to as the pineal gland, this gland that is at the center of our brain, which is processing light. And this article here reads how, since the pineal gland was the last of the endocrine glands to be discovered, and scientists still aren't fully sure of all its functions, the pineal gland has long been a mysterious organ. The pineal gland was commonly called the third eye for many reasons, including its location deep in the center of the brain and its connection to light via the circadian rhythm and melatonin secretion. Many spiritual traditions believe it serves as a connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. Another caption down here reads, the pineal gland located deep inside the center of the brain acts as a doorway between the physical and spiritual world. Poor diet, lack of sleep, and high consumption of fluoride can block the full potential of this gland. Perhaps something I would disagree here with is lack of sleep actually affects the pineal gland. In my experience, it's important to wake up with the sun, to try and rise early between 5 and 6 in the morning, just as the sun rises. It's not beneficial to sleep on if you're going through a spiritual awakening, to try and catch up in your sleep if you feel like you're processing a lot of energy or a lot of thoughts. It's actually very important to wake up early if you're going through a spiritual awakening, because there is a lot of work to be done. So I also come across this image of a figure meditating, and I noticed the symbols that were surrounding this image, how each symbol seemed to impact upon an energy center. Somehow it was related to each energy center. But I also noticed how these symbols were very similar to the symbols for the Zodiac. Here we have on the right hand side of the mind, of the third eye, or the crown, we have this 69 symbol. And within the star sign Cancer, we also have the 69. Beside Cancer, we have this symbol here where we have two lines, two curved lines beside one another. Very similar here. So the symbols here around this body, conveying this idea how each symbol is actually influencing each energy center within our body, actually conveys the same idea of how the zodiac is actually affecting us throughout the year. How, as we go through the year, the zodiac affects each energy center. It rises from the root up to the crown and goes back down. So we are actually at the mercy not only to other people's thoughts and emotions, but we are also at mercy to the forces that are around us within the universe, within the zodiac. And we are being influenced and drawn into particular ways as the year goes round. And so another interesting idea I came across was this idea how Jesus was born in the sign of Pisces. There's a story within the Bible how Jesus turns loaves and fishes into many. He feeds the hungry and he turns one loaf and one fish into many for people, and he feeds the hungry. And that Jesus is actually associated with the age of Pisces. But within spiritual circles, it is believed that now, in this era, we are actually moving into the age of Aquarius. We are currently in the age of Pisces, where Christianity rose and Christ rose. And now we are gradually moving into the age of Aquarius. Somewhere around the year 2150, it is believed that we will fully emerge into the age of Aquarius. And so this is interesting here from our diagram of our zodiacs, because actually if we're moving from Pisces into Aquarius, it looks like we're going backwards, because Pisces is moving from February 19th to March 20th, and then Aquarius starts in January. But it is believed that the zodiac signs in the ages are actually moving in retrograde. And what this means is that they're moving backwards, in a sense. So I thought this was interesting, how Pisces actually ends in March 20th. If we think about the idea, it is believed that Christ died on the cross on March 18th in the sign of Pisces. And he rose again 3 days later, which would be March 21st. So he died in Pisces, in the Pisces sign, but he rose again outside of the Pisces sign in the next zodiac sign. And we might imagine that perhaps Christ then would be in the sign of Aries. But from a spiritual perspective, it is believed that the signs of the ages are actually moving in retrograde and they're moving backwards. This means that we're going not from Pisces to Aries, but we're going from Pisces to Aquarius. So this is interesting as well, that this actually means that the image of Christ walking in water actually reflects upon this idea as well, that of the third chakra, that Pisces is actually the third zodiac sign as well. If you imagine the zodiac starts in Capricorn in December, moves to Aquarius, and then moves to Pisces, that Christ is actually reflects this idea that Christ is actually in the third zodiac. And this actually reflects then, as you can see from our image here, of a man meditating, that this actually refers to the third chakra again, which means fire. So this is interesting, in the sense that the image of Christ walking in water, and a lot of the images of Christ with his heart on fire, actually convey this idea of the zodiac, of astrological, esoteric kind of happenings that are going on around us. And even a lot of the passages within the Bible as well kind of convey this idea of when Christ was said to be born, when he died, what age he died, in astrological terms and esoteric terms, and where we are astrologically. That en masse there is an awakening that happened from 2012, and this awakening eventually will result in the baptism of fire. This is something that cannot be stopped. A lot of people are awakening to this and becoming aware of Christ consciousness within them, where they're no longer able to exist in this dualistic way of thinking, seeing things as right and wrong, or good and bad, or being able to think selfishly and only think about themselves. They're actually, what Christ consciousness means is embracing humanity, embracing one another, and thinking of one another. This is how people eventually will awaken as the age of Aquarius kind of moves forward. So these ages are reflected also within Hindu texts and other spiritual texts. And it is believed from a Hindu cosmological point of view that our galaxy moves in this cycle, precessional cycle, every 25,920 years. It goes through a complete revolution, and it has 4 ages: Satya Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, Treta Yuga, and Kali Yuga. And so this is also reflected in other astrological, spiritual interpretations, where it is believed we are moving into the age of Aquarius, and it's also believed that the cycle of precession of our galaxy takes 25,800 years. And this is actually easy to research, how different groups across the world actually convey this idea and have come to similar conclusions. The website I got this information off is called earthsky.org. If you're interested in doing a little bit of research on this, just visit the website and you'll see concurring times and dates for astrological happenings. So thank you for listening. And yeah, I just wanted to share this idea that there are many images, there are many interpretations we can take from the image of Christ walking in water. That Christ, these images actually convey the idea that Christ is at the center of everything, astrologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. In all ways, Christ is at the center of everything.